Welcome to this monthly border report here at Via International and the Via Cafe. We're trying to provide regular updates of things that are happening along and across the US-Mexico border here, specifically in the San Diego-Tijuana region. One of those monthly updates we're doing in Spanish as part of our Escuela Amistad. Dan Watman, the head of the Escuela Amistad, and Robert Vivar, who coordinates our Charla Amigos program, are giving a monthly update in Spanish. And if you'd like to be a part of a Spanish language conversation, work on your Spanish, and at the same time hear the latest news from the border, please just let us know and we'll include you in that opportunity. And then once a month here, the fourth Tuesday of the month, we're trying to bring in an expert voice about something that's been in the news pertaining to life here on the San Diego-Tijuana border. So today our guest is Jason Wells. Jason's the executive director of the San Ysidro Chamber of Commerce. And I'm going to add him to the spotlight, and I'll invite the rest of you to join me with a round of applause as we welcome Jason Wells. Jason, thanks for joining.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the invitation. Good morning.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, and welcome everybody. Welcome, Jason. We'll continue to admit people in the wait room. Thanks for helping me with that, staff members. Jason, first tell us, how's it been for you as the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce? How many businesses are in your membership down in San Ysidro?
Yeah, we've got about 770 businesses that actually have a zip code of 92173, and then another about 100 businesses or so with interest in our bilateral border work.
And how's it been for your constituents, your member organizations these last 2 years?
Horrendous, in a word. We're San Ysidro. The reason we're on the map is because of our location with Mexico, and our businesses tend to the consumer from across the border. San Ysidro basically, as for those of you that may not know, has basically two main corridors. Commercially, we've got the outlets that everybody's heard of, but about 65% of their customers are coming from across the border. But on the boulevard side are all of our mom and pops, where you've got 95% of the customers coming from Mexico, and a large majority of both customer bases are pedestrians with tourist visas, precisely those that haven't been allowed to cross. So, and especially for me as an optimist, naturally, singing doom and gloom for the last 19 months has just been horrendous. We actually lost 236 businesses that, opening tomorrow, they're not going to reopen their businesses. I think more importantly, and especially to a group like this, we lost 2,300 jobs. I mean, it's 2,300 families that lost their ability to feed their children if that's the one job they depended on. Yeah. We're hoping a lot of those will be recuperated. We'll never recuperate lost, dollars or interactions, right? Which, by the way, last month we hit $1.3 billion in loss. That's billion with a B on lost sales. So it's I can't overestimate or over exaggerate, the impact the restrictions have had on us. A lot of times, those that aren't from border communities don't quite understand. You've got to be exaggerating. How can you depend so much? And the case I tell them is, it's as if in the pandemic, the governor of California said, "Little Italy, you're available to open up, go get back to life," right? And then the president came in and said, "Okay, but the only people that can shop and eat in Little Italy are those that live in Little Italy." They wouldn't have survived, and we have been barely.
And Jason, I've heard you describe before that because of your unique location, your membership in the Chamber of Commerce includes very large outlet international organizations and then these small mom and pop. Right. You've mentioned all these closures. Does that include closures of local small businesses, but are also some of the larger corporations or larger retailers, have they evacuated during this period of time as well?
Yeah, the larger retailers are hard because they don't like to share information, internal information. So a lot of times, you'll get kind of convoluted stories. But yes, you can go to to Las Americas and see doors that are closed, stores that have left. So I don't want to focus too much on them. Again, their information. Yeah. But there's one really sad story. There was an elderly lady that I had. When reporters come for interviews, they always ask for businesses to talk to. And so she was the owner of Tacos Revolucion, which became Tacos La Frontera. And like I said, elderly woman, had her family helping her out, and they were you know, all day or 7 day a week open taco shop. Then they had to, you know, reduce their days down to, I think, 3-4 days a week. And then we got the news 2 weeks ago, right before we announced the opening was going to be November 8th, that they actually closed down for good.
Yeah.
And so again, I got dozens of those stories, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then you mentioned this particular clientele of residents of Tijuana who have tourist visas in particular. Some of the folks will have heard about this closure of the border, but maybe don't quite understand exactly the different profiles. Who has been allowed to cross the border and who hasn't? What are the categories of people?
I have a politically sensitive answer that I won't give to this group, but in reality, what had happened in March of 2020 was then President Trump decided that the tourist visa holders would no longer be able to cross the border. They called them, you know, only essential crossings. Essential to me is like what we went through a few years ago with the term illegal. I think every person is essential. Every job is essential. Every time you fill your gas tank in San Ysidro to go to Tijuana is essential. You know, anyway, and I've told you already about the family, or the families lost their ability to feed their children, right? They're all essential. But anyway, so U.S. citizens by the Constitution cannot be, to use a double negative, not allowed into the country. So U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents were always able to cross the border. But again, it was the tourist visa holders that were not. You know, I have always said that, you know, this really wasn't about the pandemic. It wasn't anything scientific or logical about the pandemic. I guess I'm going into my political answer, but I won't go too far off, John. You know, the big, large corporations, their heart monitors and TVs and all that could still cross because cargo was not touched. And they stated that from the beginning. Your regional employment centers, they were okay because legal permanent residents and U.S. citizens could still cross. You know, if you worked in the United States, you should be one of those two categories. But, you know, Trump had to throw some red meat to his people about protecting us from those Mexicans, right? And so the tourist visa was the easy pickings. And now let me just back that up on some numbers, since I say his wasn't about logic and numbers. When the restrictions first happened, as the chamber, we helped the county of San Diego go to the border and open up a testing site right at the world's busiest land border crossing. The infection rates from Mexico were never at any point higher than the infection rates of the rest of San Diego. So what are we protecting against? Then vaccinations started. The U.S. sent vaccinations to Mexico. The president of Mexico sent those vaccinations purposefully to the northern Mexican states to get restrictions lifted. Baja hit the 75th percentile of vaccinations before we did. And so my point is science and logic and numbers have been with us through this whole process. And it's just now going to be November 8th that we're getting rid of these restrictions.
Yeah, the policy fashioned in Washington, D.C., once again, trailing way behind the realities on the ground at the border, right?
Correct.
An old story, but yeah. So, and then before we move forward in time, let me just circle back to one other detail that, again, many people will have heard of, but perhaps people don't know the particulars. How is it that a resident of Tijuana, a Mexican national, gets a tourist visa? And what does that tourist visa allow them to do? Or how does what's the dynamic of the tourist visa that is such a, as you've described, a foundational part of the economy to here in San Ysidro?
Sure. I mean, first, of course, they have to have a recent or in good standing Mexican passport, right? So you take your Mexican passport and you apply to the U.S. Department of State for a tourist visa, which in essence, you just have to prove that you have roots in Mexico, meaning, you know, you've got a steady job in Mexico, you own land in Mexico or long-term rental, just something that brings you back, you know, to Mexico, and you went across for, you know, to see family or tourist shopping, whatever, what have you.
Yeah.
one thing we've seen, and I'm not going to get into whether this abuses what is a tourist visa or not,
Yeah.
but a lot of our clientele as well are small businesses in Tijuana. I mean, these are mom and pop shops in Tijuana that, because San Isidro sells at wholesale prices and no limiting on quantities, they'll come and actually get their inventory from San Isidro, then to go sell into Tijuana. So, the restrictions, contrary to public statements, actually hurt a lot of Tijuana businesses as well.
Yeah. And so that tourist visa holder, am I right that the typical tourist visa would be a 10-year visa?
I believe so, correct. 5 or
and
10.
then
I think it is 10.
And that allows for multiple entries, that is to say, and then US authorities would be simply, for instance, monitoring a pattern of crossing to ensure that people aren't, moving across and working on a tourist visa, or et cetera, et cetera. But do you have a sense of how many residents in Tijuana would be holders of this tourist visa? Is there any good number?
Yeah, the last number I heard, and this was from the mayor of Tijuana's office, was somewhere around 45% of the population.
So, and if we take Tijuana's population at topping 3 million, we're talking about 1.5 million people for whom this tourist visa is really woven into their daily life, or it's a regular part of the fabric of their life. And from their perspective, shopping in San Isidro is just a matter of cost comparison, and is that about?
I'll just share an anecdote. Something I learned, I don't know, 10 years ago, but it was 10 years ago. I thought I knew everything about cross-border shopping and this and that. But one of the main reasons, even today, when you still have a lot of the, there's Walmarts and Costco's and what have you down in Mexico, the reason that a lot of people still shop in San Isidro comes down to the return policy.
Oh,
if you don't like something, or doesn't fit, or you just don't like it, or what have you, you return it. You either get your money back or store credit. That doesn't happen a lot in Mexico.
Interesting.
And so it's kind of an interesting anecdote that I found, that the return policy is a big reason people continue to shop here.
Yeah. So you have this huge customer base or client base that was suddenly prohibited from crossing the border for the patterns of behavior, consumption, shopping, family, socializing, visiting, et cetera, touristing.
Correct.
And what do you have a sense of what have those people, have businesses prospered in Tijuana? Have folks gone elsewhere for their shopping, or what have folks had to do with Little Italy closed? Where have people been going for their recreation and for their consumer spending?
And this has kind of been a sensitive topic with a lot of with binational organizations, or organizations. I'll say not binational organizations, but border organizations. Yeah. So like the chambers in a place like Tijuana and ourselves, a lot of them, yes, are reporting that some businesses did better, but a lot of them will tell you that even.
Oops. Sorry, Jason.
You got me in the mute net.
Sorry, you're good now.
But even those places will tell you, a lot of the business owners, that doesn't mean they're happy about getting that little uptick in sales, because our binational lives have been interrupted. Yeah. We know there's things you get here, there's things you get there. I've heard stories, even down to folks that are diabetic, they would get their nails cut in places in San Isidro, or in San Isidro, because of, anybody who knows about diabetes, it's the techniques and cutting nails and all, everything from that to the small businesses that actually got their inventory in San Isidro. Of course, you'll hear a lot of families that have been grandparents that haven't seen their grandkids in a long time. But even though a few businesses may have done better, we know as a binational region, we're not for the better with these restrictions.
Well, and just, the basic principle of the circulation of the dollar, right, is always, the opportunities for expansion and growth are whenever you restrict that flow, you're restricting opportunity in the aggregate, right? The economy, the big E economy, the big circle, right? Well, and thanks so much. And Jason, as we shift to a conversation now, looking forward and to this much talked about reopening, I just want to remind folks in our Zoom room that if you're welcome to drop questions into the chat. One of our friends just observed in the chat room right now that it's taking more than 1 year to renew a visa, so that the visa renewal process can be another log jam. But feel free to jot questions in the chat, and here in just about 10-15 minutes, I'm going to open it up and we'll just have a shared conversation. You'll be able to ask live questions on, with Jason. Another one question that popped in right now, Jason, I'll just lift it up since we're in this topic of, restrictions. Did Mexico impose any limits on entry at any time, to your knowledge?
And this goes back to, my quasi-political stance on the restrictions. Remember, it was very interesting watching the Mexican secretary, the Secretary of the Exterior, which would be like our Secretary of State, Secretary Ebrard. It was very interesting watching his posture during this whole time, because in the beginning, when the restrictions were placed, it was they wanted them, they being Mexico and the Secretary of Exterior Relations, wanted them to seem as a partner in all of this. So this was an agreement by all three countries that we're going to do these restrictions, but no, restrictions were never placed at Mexican borders. Then when people started getting tired of them, then they kind of backed off, and it was kind of like, well, and then as the negative feelings on border restrictions, the last 6 to 9 months really started increasing. Then, the Americans still haven't said, So that's been interesting. I will say there were some limits placed in Mexicali, and there's another place in, it was either Arizona or New Mexico, when there were specific outbreaks that happened. There were some limitations placed on going into Mexico, but as an overall rule or practice, there were never restrictions generally placed on going into Mexico.
Well, so thanks for that, and thanks again. Feel free to share experiences and comments. The pedestrian crossings were profoundly impacted with the full closure of the Ped West crossing, but the Ped East crossing then would also have been dramatically reduced in foot traffic because of the restrictions. Is the intent now, with this reopening, let's shift to that, is the intent to reopen first the Ped East crossing, or have you heard anything about, does the reopening include Ped West or not?
What I will say is officially there has, and I just got off the phone with CBP this morning, officially there's been no direction for the opening of Ped West.
Gotcha.
So that's not to say it will not. What I'm saying is at this point, there is no official planning to do so. Obviously a difficult piece in that is on the Mexican side of Ped West, you've got the migrant camps. Right. Now and this is just me reading, this part is just me reading between the lines. It sounds like that the government is waiting, the CBP is waiting for the White House to say how and when they'll enact or repeal the Stay in Mexico piece. And then I'm sure Ped West will be used because you're going to have to facilitate all those applications. I'm sure Ped West will be used to some degree with that. So I would expect some kind of an opening of Ped West soon, but I really doubt it's going to be 100% 24/7.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that Remain in Mexico policy is particularly referencing the applications for asylum, and that Ped West Plaza Chaparral had really been the principal location where people would go to, right, to file those claims. Yeah. Well, we want to go back to the Plaza Chaparral because we have a lot of folks in the room I know who are very committed to the migrant population in Tijuana and working with the shelters and including at the Chaparral. But more broadly, then we have a reopening, which is specifically this population of quote unquote non-essential, but folks that are very essential to your businesses. But it's not all of those folks who can come in. It's presumably people who can verify their status as vaccinated. Is that correct?
Okay.
Or do you know?
I do know. I'm just figuring out how to word this. The Federal Register was just changed to state that border restrictions can be lifted for those non-US nationals that have been vaccinated. Yeah. The practice of checking vaccinations I think any of us that have spent any time down here, especially in a professional sense, know that if we really checked 100% of vaccinations, we'd have 6-8 hour lines. We might as well stay closed.
Yeah.
So I'm not speaking for CBP at this point. I'm speaking just Jason, not even on behalf of the chamber. I don't, there's no way you could do 100% vaccination inspections. Now, as an American, as just a person on earth, I hope everybody's vaccinated. And I would hope that that those crossing adhere to them, that they should be vaccinated.
Yeah.
But I just think the practice of actually individually checking that is impossible.
And some of our friends from Mexico in the room might be able to, is there, I'm not sure whether whether there's even been has there been a standard issue vaccination card in Mexico that would be a uniform or
it's actually
recognizable document?
It's actually better than the paper postcard I got from CBS on my vaccination.
Yeah.
They actually have an electronic one. It's got a QR, whatever, the scanner code on there and everything. So it, when checked, they should be easily verifiable.
Gotcha. But yeah, as you're saying, to take every car in that line or every person waiting in the the pedestrian crossing line, and ask them to add a supplemental document to their process. I mean, yeah, just sounds like a nightmare to me. So November 8th are the businesses that you're working with, and is there a great sense of anticipation? Is there a feeling that maybe we're turning the corner, or
it's a feeling of now we'll be able to breathe again, literally from a business standpoint, and getting back to our lives. Again, over 65% of my businesses will actually make their entire net sales, their profit is made between November 20th and January 6th, on a normal year. So the fact that this is happening November 8th, I mean, the timing couldn't have been, well, it could have been better. It could have been 19 months ago, but it couldn't, for this year, it couldn't have come at a better time. So yeah, our businesses are really expecting a strong holiday season to enable them to then set themselves up in the spring to be able to last throughout the future.
And actually, Andrea in the chat room is asking about, is there any indication there's been a kind of a pent up consumer demand, or people who are saving their just consumer income for a big holiday season? Is that part of the rush?
Well, if memes on Facebook are any indication, then yes. I don't know if we've all seen the memes of being ready for November 28th, right, with all the shopping bags.
I got you.
I think so. I always like to give anecdotes, not because but just because you can read most of what we're talking about in the newspaper, right? But anecdotally, I've had businesses report that since the announcement of November 8th opening, sales have gone down. Why that is it's because the people that can't cross or haven't been able to cross used to send money with people that could to do their buying for them. And so now that they've heard, hey, I'm going to be able to cross in 2 weeks, now they're not giving, the extra money to the person that could cross. So it's, interesting things like that we've seen. Another thing has been when I talked about those retail jobs lost, and in Tijuana too, the pandemic has caused people to lose hours and jobs and what have you. If you go to a money exchange on a Tuesday after, let's go right now, you'll see lines almost around the building. And I at first was like, why is this happening? The peso hasn't changed, or the value hasn't changed. What's going on? Well, there are people that are, and this isn't illegal, whether they record their taxes or not, or income on that maybe, but it's not an illegal act. What people are doing is simply playing the exchange rate game.
Yeah.
And so they're getting a lot of, especially those legal permanent residents, they're getting a lot of the stimulus money checks and other monies, and basically investing them by buying pesos here in San Isidro and crossing the border and buying dollars. And then taking that back and just keep going over and over again. Well, we've seen, it's been reported, people getting $100, $200 a day by doing this. In Tijuana, that's a lot of money. I mean, $200 a day is a good amount of money for anybody, right?
Absolutely.
but you got to be willing to do it. So it's a lot of line standing and walking.
Yeah. Well, and so referencing this line standing and the wait times and so forth, yeah, Jim Gerber is commenting that, supposedly the reduced times for crossing were reduced during the pandemic, but I know also staffing was, dramatically reduced.
Yeah, and we're getting into one of my huge problems with CBP has been that for much of the last 19 months, they had 45% of our normal crossings happening. They had 100% of their personnel during that time. And without exaggerating, we were having 3 to 5 hour wait times on a regular basis. So even people that they considered essential weren't able to get to their jobs on time. When you still, like I said, you have half the crossers in the same personnel. Part of the problem is that 5 hour wait times don't get on CNN, but 200 migrants camped at Penn West do. So they put a lot of officers tending to those things because of that. Now, going forward, I do know some management changes have been made in CBP, and some people in high positions have been brought back, people that I know that are sensitive to keeping wait times to a minimal. So I do know that CBP does have wait times as we reopen, very front of the mind. That's a good thing for us. And so we're I've been asked, word or 2 words, how do you feel about the openings? I said we're cautiously ecstatic. If you can be both of those things at the same time, that's where we are.
Gotcha. Yeah, and again, without going into the hard politics of it, so part of this is the Clinton administration appointments, or I'm sorry, the Biden administration.
Okay, you're going way back.
I'm 30 years, yeah. They're about the same age, probably, Bill Clinton and Joe Biden. But anyway, the appointing people into the key decision-making positions within CBP, is that part of what's happening?
No. The positions I was talking about were local, so within the field office here.
Gotcha.
The people that are directly over our ports of entry.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, which is more important, right?
Yeah.
Because they're the people we can call when problems arise.
Gotcha. And how is the overall? Yeah. So the staffing was not. They did not suffer a great loss of staffing, is your understanding, locally?
No, they did. In fact, they often got waves of TDY, or TDYs, the military folks will understand that term, temporary duty folks. They got waves of temporary duty folks. As a matter of fact, I want to say in June, like June 20 something, no, I'm sorry, June in the teens, they CBP locally here in San Ysidro got a wave of temporary duty officers. So that led all of us to believe, hey, July 1 or July or June 18th or 21st, June 21st, we're going to open. That never happened. But yeah, the staff has never been a suffering point for CBP here.
Yeah, interestingly, U.S. Border Patrol also is, staffing has been an issue. But I'm curious to know whether I also wonder about their hiring and, onboarding process. Just kind of, I know challenging times for employers in a lot of ways, but wonder whether the pipeline of personnel into these big government agencies is, what the status of that is and how they're doing it, recruiting and retaining their own personnel. I've always wondered that, to be honest.
Well, unfortunately, because of the last 5 years from the presidential level, CBP has kind of gone back into that horse blinders, security only. So we don't have the kind of dialogue we had for the 10 years previous. And real quick, I do want to say, looking into the future, and we've talked about these, but I just want to encapsulate the 2 major problems I've seen. So, in the military, something bad happens, you find out who's culpable, right? You find guilt, and then you find out how that's not going to happen again. And so in looking at how to not let this happen begin, 2 things we learned. One is that border communities have no voice in DC. Yeah. And that's not about congressional folks. I'm just saying in general, we have no voice in DC. So one of the things that we're working on is the Border Mayors Conference. It's usually an annual, very nice dinner at a different border crossing every year, and you get a nice PowerPoint on some successes that region has had. We're asking that they become more of an advocacy group.
Great.
So there's one thing for Jason Wells and Todd Gloria to be over here screaming, this is killing us, killing. But if I've got 40 mayors that are saying the same thing, then eventually DC has to start listening. The second point is what we were just talking about, is that we've lost working with and communications with CBP over the last 5 years. And so for that, we're calling on, and I don't want to call it an oversight group because there's congressional oversight for CBP, but there needs to be a group convened with secretaries of Treasury and Commerce, Department of State, because that's where our ambassadors,
Diplomats.
consul generals are, and stakeholders with CBP, so that there is an official looking at effects of wait times on communities. And we need to get back. I was part of a team almost 20 years ago working with then CBP Commissioner Alan Burson, when we really got him to not only say but enact the balance of community with security, a balance of economy with security. You can't have one without the other. Unfortunately, with the presidential change 5 years ago,
that way of thinking went out the window. Yeah, well, the restoration of that. And how's your experience in your sphere? Building coalitions across the length of the border is always so challenging. You find that on these issues, cross-border commerce, that the interests from San Diego, Tijuana, all the way to Brownsville, Matamoros, they pretty well align, or like your mayor's conference, are people able to speak in a common voice?
It was very interesting. I don't think it's as monolithic or as easy as you would think.
Yeah.
And so early on, we were putting together a letter, and I tried to get we got contacts for all the border chambers across from here to Brownsville, and to get people to sign on to say we should reopen our borders for the economy type of thing. That it wasn't an easy statement. And we had some chambers that purposefully did not sign on. Now, some of them, I want to say near Matamoros, I think at the time there was a huge outbreak, and so they were afraid of any kind of reopening. But some of them you could really tell it was a red state, blue state kind of thing. Yeah. It was really disappointing to me at how, monolithic is usually not a good term, but you would think it would kind of be.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as much as I thought.
Yeah, no, well, that's it. Yeah, the San Isidro, San Isidro and Tijuana being, stacked right up against each other at the border has always reminded me a lot of like Calexico, Mexicali, or El Paso, Juarez, where you're really able to walk from a commercial downtown center right into another commercial downtown center. But yeah, there are some places along the border where that, where the major U.S. center is further removed from the actual border crossing. I can see how they might have they might not perceive themselves, they may be, but they may not perceive themselves as quite as intertwined, right?
And then you've got places like San Antonio that consider themselves more of a border town than the rest of San Diego does. Yeah. And they're 300 miles away from.
Right. Yeah. Well, very good. Well, and then lastly on this, the question again from Jim Gerber, who, as you may know, is an economist and has studied the border region for years. He's just noting that the wait times always seem longer in California than Texas and Arizona. Is that do you have a sense of that? And the San Diego, Tijuana, or the San Isidro Port of Entry get the short end of the stick when it comes to border wait times?
I think it's a combination of two things. Number one is just sheer numbers. If you add San Isidro and Otay Mesa together, you're not going to come up with another 2 crossings that would even be a tenth of what we do. But I think also, and here's some, I used to get reminded all the time, unfortunately he's passed away, but a former president of our board a long time ago, well, I remember, things got bad. I would just walk down to the port and knock on the director's door and say, hey, get this thing going. Well, you still have that in a lot of places in Texas. Right? Some of Texas has people that own their own bridges. So if things aren't going well, they literally pick up the phone, and I'm not going to practice my southern slang or draw, but we'll tell the guy, hey, get this stuff up and running, and they do so, which we don't have here. Yeah,
gotcha. Yeah, how many lanes in theory, vehicle lanes are there in theory at the San Isidro Port of Entry these days?
Geez, I forgot.
44, I think.
No, I think we're I want to say we had the original 20. I think we're at 33,
Okay,
if I remember.
but
correctly.
they're
But
rarely firing on all cylinders, correct?
and never have they all been open with both double stack booths open.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah.
Which is
Well, yeah, and then
another
there, I
problem.
know we're into very, these are large organizations, and the management and staffing of all that, I'm sure, is very complicated.
But we can't give them that excuse. I mean, it
No,
was that
no.
same government that spent $877 million on building the double stack booths.
Yeah,
They should be able to figure out the personnel issue.
I hear you. Yeah. Beryl Flum's asking about she's asking about fumes of vehicles waiting in line, but I've seen other things just about the general health impacts of the wait times for both vehicle crossings and pedestrian crossings. Has a lot of attention been paid to that? I mean, what physical toll is being taken on people by these kinds of waits?
Differences from different sides. So one, I will say it's almost hypocritical of the government in that we built these new facilities to be LEED certified. And this port of entry has everything from fume absorbing paints to green areas, et cetera, yet they're not concentrating on lowering wait times. Also, San Isidro, and I would suspect this has happened between here and Brownsville and other places, but when the county of San Diego used to register air quality, San Isidro was never counted because they knew that the port of entry would skew the rest of San Diego. And how do you tell Ohioans to come to La Jolla and then have the air quality bad? So I do want to give a lot of credit to Casa Familiar, which is a social services organization here in San Isidro, working with San Diego State and some other universities, had just begun our actual air quality not controls, but the measuring, so that we became part of the county's conversation on that. So the answer to her question is not a lot, but I think a lot of attention has been placed on the issue that will bring forth fruit very quickly.
Gotcha. Thanks very much. Well, let me, before we open it up for just general conversation, let me turn specifically to the Ped West crossing, the migrant camp in the Plaza Chaparral. We have Robert Vivar in the room, whose office is right there adjacent to the Chaparral. Many of our friends and constituents will have walked across there back in the day and stopped in at Robert's office. Robert, what are you hearing? Maybe it's rumors, but what are you hearing, or what are people who are adjacent to the Chaparral on the Mexican side, what's being communicated out to them? Are there any formal communications of what they should be expecting as far as Ped West and a prospective reopening?
Yes, thank you. Again, just like Jason said, there's nothing really, out there officially set in stone. What we understand is, of course, the border reopening to non-essential travel, except for Ped West. And part of the reasoning that we are hearing is because of the migrant camp that is established there at that location. The new municipal government has launched a project or a desire to relocate the migrants to other parts. I understand there is another shelter that is being looked at. They're looking also at perhaps capacity at the federal shelter to be able to house those that would like to go ahead and be relocated, at least to better living conditions. And they're also offering for those that want to return to their home residence, even if it is in Central America, to pay for their transportation. The problem, though, is that people are remaining and they don't want to leave the Chaparral Esperanza migrant camp, is because they still with the idea that by being there at the camp, that they will have a better opportunity to be able to access the asylum process when and if it does ever open up. Of course, that has been a continued issue because of misinformation that we have seen from day one when the camp was established. Part of the work that we do with an alliance that we have created of different organizations in support of our migrants is to provide the most accurate, updated information that we have available, as we perceive it from our friends from Al Otro Lado Immigrant Defenders Law Center, which were very active in assisting migrants to apply for Title 42 exemptions to be able to enter the United States to access the asylum process. And we know, however, that as of August the 4th, that process was discontinued. And at this time, there is no access to the asylum process. We understand, just like Jason mentioned, that it is being worked between both governments on reestablishing the Remain in Mexico MPP program. A big concern is that when and if it does occur, how are they going to be processed? How are they going to be funneled in to apply for that process? In the past, we know that migrants had to line up very early in the morning to place their names on an illegal list that should have never been created, but that was the only way they could access it, which gave off to a lot of corruption. All of a sudden, people that just showed up one day ended up being placed at the top of the list, while other people that had been waiting there for months were still waiting in line. Well, that is one of the big concerns, that whatever the process that is brought forth is a process that is going to be fair to those seeking asylum. Regardless, we don't want MPP program to restart. We want Title 42 to be canceled. We want migrants that are seeking protection, that are forced through forced migration, have the opportunity to that legal opportunity of applying for asylum. That is a very great concern of us. However, we're also very concerned with our migrant population here at the camp. There's many children that are being subjected to the elements. And we have winter coming up. We just had a pretty good downpour of rain, flooded quite a bit of the camp. Those are concerns that we're going to continue to have. We have formed a network of support here recently in collaboration with the new municipal government and the governor, the state elected officials, as far as the migrant department, Dirección de Atención al Migrante, along with Refugee Health Alliance, Provencasa, Psicólogos Sin Fronteras, so we can offer a complete support system to the migrants. We launched a pilot program this Saturday, which was very effective. We had medical attention, psychological interventions. We had legal advice from our friends at United States Citizen Refugee Immigrants Services. We also had participation from the local and state government as far as issuing identification for those that didn't have identification, and providing information for any benefits that all of our migrants are entitled to.
Robert, I don't know that I've ever asked you, but back in the day, long ago, before this informal or illegal, this informal system of signing up on the list and coming back to see if your number was going to get called, but there was a time when there was the federal agency Grupos Beta. I back 20 years ago, I'm talking, I thought was kind of understood to be the go-to agency there at the port of entry on the Mexican side for migrants and deportees. Is Grupos Beta still a big part of the conversation, or no?
Not really. What I've seen from Beta lately is just channeling people to some of the shelters, in particular the federal shelter, and on many occasions doing work similar to U.S. Border Patrol.
Yeah, facilitating the deportation process, in effect.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so thanks. You two together have identified, really this looming question of, MPP, what becomes of that, and how do you undo this policy, which has created this enormous backlog and pent up demand for access to the asylum system. how do you regularize that? How do you institutionalize it? How do you make it known to people in a way that they have confidence in it? Because if they don't have confidence in it, yeah, what's their incentive to give up their, I mean, they've hung out, they pitched their tent for a long time. That's gotta be a tough one to get them to, if they feel like they've staked their claim in line, that's a hard one to get somebody to release what they perceive to be their place in line, in effect. Am I right?
That is correct. And that is the big challenge.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of the information we provide through an alliance that we've created, Chaparral Humanitarian Alliance, we have an information session every Wednesday to provide, again, updated information as to where the process is at. And we also show some movies for the kids out there. But it's very important to continue to provide that accurate information so they're not continuously being misled, because that's what's going to keep them motivated to remain there. We know that it doesn't matter whether you're at the Chaparral or at one of the shelters. Once the process is available, it'll be available to everybody.
Yeah.
And the conditions that they have to subject themselves here, nobody should be subjected to live in that manner.
Yeah.
One thing we haven't mentioned is CBP is literally freaked out right now because they're trying to reopen borders for get rid of the restrictions, deal with the migrants that are already camped at ports of entry, and there's a whole other wave of caravan coming through right now. So
yeah, I was curious about that too, Robert, whether you've seen, are people establishing new tents and or residences at the periphery of that camp there at the Chaparral? Is it beginning to grow again? I know there was a time when it seemed to have retrenched a little bit, but are you seeing it begin to bulge a little bit?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, what is very notable is before it used to be perhaps like maybe one big kitchen that was operating. Now there's several kitchens in the compound. And also when you look at the structures, before it was just, per se a tent. Now you're seeing makeshift structures that resemble, like 1-bedroom apartments made out of not only the tent material, but cardboard, plywood. Some even have a frame. So they're looking at it that they're going to be in for the long haul.
Yeah. Well, and as you say, winter's coming. So, we'll return to that theme, of course. And many of you have been to visit with Robert and our Via Migrante program and the support we've been trying to offer through Via International to leaders within these populations of migrants and deportees. You'll be hearing more about that, and we're planning a series of bus trips, day trips to get to know and meet leaders in these communities for early in 2022. So you'll hear more about that moving forward. Let me go ahead and just open it up, see if we have about 10 minutes before we close. Just open it up into the general room. See if Dan had a question. This is our friend Dan Watman, Jason, who I think you know, but wondering, is there some lower number that CBP never goes below in terms of wait times? In other words, are they say if it gets down to 30 minutes, well, that's too little and we're just gonna roll it back? Or have you ever heard anything about what they consider to be their minimum target?
Well, what I have heard, I mean, is in general, you have to have some kind of line in order to have time to react to something you may find in the inspection. But to go to more specifics, so they do have a practice. I won't say it's a rule or law, but there's a practice of, they've got a promise of 30 minutes or less for CenturyLane. And then we're talking about vehicles here. There's a practice of 30 minutes or less CenturyLane. The unwritten rule is that they don't want ready should be twice that, and general should be twice that. That of ready. And it's purposely because obviously they would love for everybody to be registered in Century. Where just as an anecdote here, they want everybody to register in Century so they know everything about everybody that's crossing. And here's the extent to which they know everybody. I had a electrical shortage in my car that just happened to happen as we were crossing the border, and I couldn't lower my window. Well, 3 months later, I'm still asked to lower all of my windows in my car every time I cross. So anyway, just as an anecdote. So yes, those times are measured as such. And again, there's in an effort to, for people to see a benefit in being in Century.
Thanks. That's very helpful. I never thought about that. But yeah, to incentivize people to push into that Century process.
And
Fascinating.
then when restrictions were put into place, they would purposefully make weekend and what they considered non-essential hour traffic a lot longer than it would be at peak hours per se. And again, that was because a lot of what CBP does is like sentimental reaction. If you'll remember, when lines were getting long and they started renting the bicycles, and sometimes the bicycles didn't have chains or seats or whatever, and CBP wouldn't allow bicycles across because their feelings were hurt that people were circumventing. And my point had always been, well, if you don't have long lines, if you were efficient, we wouldn't have to, work ways around it. But that's kind of what we see here.
Yes, the endless inventiveness and creativity of border crossers, right? People.
But on those non-peak, what they consider non-peak, we had to let them know, if you're saying that legal workers are essential, well, there's people that work restaurants and hospitals that are going to be on the weekend or are going to be at 10 o'clock at night. So this purposeful line creation on what you consider to be non-peak times doesn't fall in line with what your practice is supposed to be.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, very good. In addition to any other questions, Dan, do you want to give a shout out about the November 9th program in Spanish?
Sí, claro. Thank you, Jason. That was a really interesting answer. Sí, si lo puedo hacer en español, como
Adelante.
el reporte va a ser en español, es un informe, le llamamos News desde la frontera, y como este reporte son el último martes, los últimos martes del mes, o el cuarto martes, el informe en español va a ser el segundo martes, o son los segundos martes siempre. Entonces el próximo es el 9 de noviembre y es sobre COVID en Tijuana. Tenemos un invitado médico que trabaja en un hospital aquí en Tijuana. Entonces todos bienvenidos, todo en español. Entonces podría ser buena práctica para los que están aprendiendo español, y cualquier persona que sepa el español, yo creo que va a ser interesante.
Thank you. Gracias. So yeah, 9th of November. Again, our sequence of programs this fall, the second Tuesday in Spanish, third Tuesday is a site visit in Spanish as part of the Escuela Amistad program, and we'll continue with these fourth Tuesdays border updates in English. Any final questions for Jason before we let him go? Maybe will you join me with a big round of applause? Jason, thanks very, 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 very much. Super just helpful to hear, what I asked at the beginning before we jumped on whether you'd want to give a shout out. Is there a business or two in San Isidro if our folks who are headed down that way, and I know it's like picking, you've got hundreds of, picking favorite children, I suppose, but any businesses that you've got your eye on as kind of bellwethers or to see how they do, or businesses that could use a local push?
Yeah, there's one. It's actually right across the street from my office. It's Maya's Gourmet Pizza. Interestingly enough, they'd opened in, I want to say November of 19, and got their beer and wine license on, I swear to you, the 19th of March of 2020. So they've been learning to operate on a skeleton, crew and everything else. And I really want to see, it's things like that. We need some changes to the community outside of our normal, retail and wholesale pricings and so forth. What I will say is, if you have any friends that are coming across the border on November 8th, we're going to do a press conference and so forth with a couple of the local mayors and so forth. But after the press conference, we're going to be at Pet East with not only ball caps, but bags of coupons for local businesses as well.
I'll get that. I'll get a link from you, Jason, for that announcement. We'll share it out with this group. Andrea, did you have a final question before we go? I see your hand raised. Maybe I missed it earlier.
No, cool. Jason, a very quirky question.
Okay.
Do Urban Leaf products, recreational marijuana, can it cross back and forth?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Marijuana
I
is
see your Urban Leaf on the back.
yes, they're a major sponsor here. But no, the marijuana is still illegal in Mexico and cannot cross.
So it's not an establishment that you can use back and forth.
That's correct. Well, their products cannot be transported back. That's correct.
Okay.
Got it.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Well, very good. Well, thanks again, Jason. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll stay in touch and I'll share out some more information with you about opportunities to support at the, now San Ysidro Chamber of Commerce is a nonprofit organization in and of itself. So Jason, I assume folks would just look for you on the web to learn more about your organization and its work. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It's SanIsidroChamber.org.
Great. Well, we'll share that out with this list as well. So
Okay.
thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you all.
Have a wonderful, thanks, Jason, for joining us.
Thank you all.
Very good weekend to you. I'll see you next time.